Alrighty. It is my distinct privilege to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Sehuelt. And he told me how to pronounce his name is you put your finger in front of your lips like shh, and then like you hit yourself and get a welt. Sehuelt. So Dr. Sehuelt. Dr. Sehuelt is currently an associate clinical professor at the University of California, Riverside School of Medicine, and an assistant clinical professor at the School of Medicine and Allied Health at Loma Linda University. Roger is quadruple board certified in internal medicine, pulmonary disease, critical care medicine, and sleep medicine through the American Board of Internal Medicine. Roger's current practice is in Banning, California, where he is a critical care physician, pulmonologist, and a sleep physician at Beaver Medical Group. He was formerly the director for intensive care services at San Gorgonio Memorial Hospital. He lectures routinely through the country at conferences for medical, physical, PA, and RT societies. PA is physical physician's assistant, and RT is respiratory therapist. Okay, societies. That's a mouthful. In addition to being a preceptor for PA and medical students, Dr. Sehuelt was the medical director for the Physician Assistant Sciences program at Loma Linda University and the medical director for a sleep lab and the medical director for the Crafton Hills College Respiratory Care Program. Dr. Sehuelt is the co-founder of medcram.com, an online medical health-related education society. His online YouTube channel has over 1 million subscriptions. His passion is demystifying medical concepts. That is a mouthful from a very educated man, but yet a very funny guy and interesting guy if you get to hang out with him. So it's my distinct privilege to welcome you here. Before that, we have special music by our musician team, brass team, and Emily with vocals. So thank you, and thank you.
Good evening again. As they're setting up, I will introduce the song. It's a classical piece by J.S. Bach. I think a lot of us know and enjoy him. So I will be singing in German. I hope that none of you speak German. But the translation is, "Abide with me, then will I fear not, the journey to that far-off land where sorrows cease and all is peace." Bist du bei mir,
Well, good afternoon, good evening. How are you? Dr. Sehuelt here, or you can call me Roger. I left the Loma Linda area a couple of days ago. It was about 90 degrees. And usually this happens. We live about a mile up in a place called Oak Glen, and it actually has a very similar climate to here in Michigan. We have apple trees. It's too cold to grow citrus, and we get snow, just like you do. And it was still about 90 degrees. This happens every year. Mother Nature puts out a little bit of heat, the blossoms start to come out, and that's when we get the freeze. And there goes the fruits and all the vegetables, right? Well, today I think we're going to talk, well, I know today we're going to talk about the no-nonsense guide to prevention and treatment of COVID-19. Are you ready for a 3-hour presentation? It's not going to be a 3-hour presentation. It's going to be much shorter than that. But what I'm going to go over is information that I think is essential that everybody ought to know. Okay? It's very, very important. You know, I am a critical care physician, so I work in an intensive care unit. And as you can imagine, the last couple of years have been quite difficult for me working in the intensive care unit. You know, I'm only 25 years old. No, just kidding. I'm 48, and no, it's been difficult. A lot of people have died, and I've had to deal with that in my intensive care unit, me and my nurses and our respiratory therapists. And so I come to you from a point of view where I've seen the worst of the worst of the worst. I work in a one-town ICU. In other words, we have one hospital in this town of Redlands, California, and we have one hospital in that town, and there's only one intensive care unit in that hospital. So anything that goes wrong in that town is coming to me. So I've seen everything. When I show up to work, when I'm in the intensive care unit, I know that if anything goes wrong in surgery, it's coming to me. If somebody has an allergic reaction down in the emergency room, it's coming to me. As my colleague says, Roger, you're the toilet. Everybody eats, what everybody eats, it's all coming to you. So be prepared and be ready to deal with it. So realize that that's the situation that I have, that I'm coming from, and what I want to do, and I'll get into this a little bit, I don't care about who's running for governor. I don't care who's running for president of the United States. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to keep people alive. So, so the last couple of years, as all of you know, politics came into medicine. I don't care about politics. If it works, I'm going to use it. Okay? So that's where I'm coming from. I'm an equal opportunity offender, as you'll see tonight. And by the time you're done, you won't know who I'm voting for. Okay? All right. So all I care about is keeping you alive. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight. This is an overview. We're briefly, just to check a box, going to talk about medicines and vaccines. You know enough about those. Okay? What I really want to get into, and what I'm going to spend the bulk of the time on, is the stuff that you don't probably know a lot about. And if you do, great, but we're going to round it out. We're going to talk about vitamin D. We're going to talk about sunlight. We're going to talk about sleep, exercise, hot and cold therapy, and fasting. Okay? This is a whirlwind. I've got about 80 slides. So take notes, get ready, and I will boil it down for you. I'm going to condense it. We're going to get into the science. If you can't follow all of the science, don't worry. We're going to come back to something very practical where the rubber meets the road. I'm going to make it very real to you, okay? You don't need to have gone to medical school to understand this talk today. But here's the problem that we have, since we're going to talk about medicines, is we have a false dichotomy that's been imposed by the media that says that if you're on the political left, you need to believe that the vaccine works, that responsible behavior like masks work, and that you should listen to authority. That's all good, but also that if you're on the political left, that you should believe that indiscriminate vaccine mandates as the only solution is also true, and that we should have draconian shutdowns. So there's good and there's bad, right? And then on the right side, the political right, we should believe in immune-enhancing interventions like sleep, sunshine, diet, and lifestyle, which of course I sign on to. I believe in that. Responsible liberty, believe in natural immunity and early treatment, but they also tell us that we're supposed to believe on the right that vaccines don't work, that we should refuse to wear masks because of liberty, and we should undermine authority because we shouldn't believe in them because, remember back in the 1960s, what did they say? Don't believe anybody over the age of 30. Do you remember that? I wasn't alive at that time, but that's what I'm told. Here's the problem with this dichotomy, is that you have to choose one side or the other, and you start to believe things that you wouldn't normally believe, and you start to dispel things that you wouldn't normally dispel. So I cut the line differently. I cut it horizontally. I actually believe that the vaccines work. I actually believe in natural immunity. And it's really funny because people will listen to me and they'll say, well, I agree with you up until you said blank. That's usually a sign that you're following a false dichotomy. If you're assuming something about what I believe because I said something else, then you're following a false dichotomy. Do you understand what I'm saying? If I go out and I'm not wearing a mask, then you automatically assume that I'm a right-wing Republican, blah, 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 blah. But if I'm wearing a mask, now you believe that you understand what I'm saying, folks? Satan doesn't want that. I mean, Satan wants that. We shouldn't be going into that. Okay? So, I believe the vaccine works. I believe that medicines do work, and I believe that they should be used appropriately. Hey, if you get into a car accident and you go to the hospital, do you want us to give you general anesthesia when we take you to surgery? Please. And for me too, okay? That anesthesia, guess what? That came from a pharmaceutical company. Okay? If you come in with meningitis into the intensive care unit and you're about to die, do you want us to give you antibiotics and blood pressure medicines to keep your blood pressure up so we can keep you alive? Yes, we want to do that. That's important to do because that's an emergency situation. Now, am I going to set you loose and say continue to do what you're doing? No. I'm going to turn you around and say, why did you get that? What things can you do to prevent that from happening again? That's responsible. Okay? So if we're intelligent about that we can do it. So I also believe that we ought to be looking at ways that we ought to improve our immunity and enhancing our interventions, sleep, sunshine, diet, and lifestyle. Folks, this is not the first time a pandemic has hit this planet. It's happened many times. And many people who've had to balance religion and science have had to deal with this. This is Martin Luther back 500 years ago. This is him writing to a letter after there was a pandemic of Black Death in his community. Listen carefully. This is Martin Luther. Others sin on the right hand. They are much too rash and reckless, tempting God and disregarding everything which might counteract death and plague. They disdain the use of medicines. They do not avoid places and persons infected by the plague, but lightheartedly make sport of it and wish to prove how independent they are. They say that it's God's punishment. If he wants to protect them, he can do so without medicines and our carefulness. This is not trusting God, but tempting him. God has created medicines and provided us with intelligence to guard and take good care of the body so that we can live in good health. If one makes no use of intelligence or medicine when he could do so without detriment to his neighbor, such a person injures his body and must be aware lest he become a suicide in God's eyes. Use medicine, take potions which can help you, fumigate your house, yard, and street, shun persons and places wherever your neighbor does not need your presence or has recovered, and act like a man who wants to help put out a burning city. What else is an epidemic but a fire which instead of consuming wood and straw devours life and body? You ought to think this way. Very well, by God's decree, the enemy has sent a poison and deadly awful. Therefore, I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated and thus perchance infect and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me. And I have done what I have expected of me, so I'm not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. This is just common sense, guys, right? So, let's look at Texas. Red Texas. Don't mess with Texas, okay? Republican governor, his whole health department says that if you are vaccinated versus unvaccinated, you're 7 times more likely to test positive for COVID-19 and 45 times more likely to die of COVID-19 if you're not vaccinated. If you're boosted, it's even more. 11 times more likely to test positive for COVID-19 and 105 times more likely to die of COVID-19 associated illness. I'm telling you this not because I have a political agenda. I'm not paid by vaccine companies. I don't want to see you in my ICU. Well, I'm not going to see you in my ICU unless you come to California. I don't want to see you in anybody's ICU. And that's all it is. And I see this every day. Right now, fortunately, we've got nobody in our ICU. Praise God. Let's hope that continues that way. But there is a wave that's coming. This is what they're telling us. It's starting, the wastewater detection is starting to go up. And I'm just to round this out, so if you want to prevent infection, vaccines are a great way of preventing infections. If you want to prevent yourself from getting a severe case, if you do get COVID, there are a number of medications that have been approved. I don't want you sitting at home getting worse and worse and worse, avoiding the hospital, because it's better to go to the hospital early than late if you're sick and you're not getting better. So, Paxlovid, up to 5 days. Molnupiravir, up to 5 days. Fluvoxamine, which is not FDA approved, but there was a trial that showed that it actually worked pretty well, up to 7 days. It prevents severe illness. And then Sotrovimab, which is a monoclonal antibody. It's the only one, unfortunately, that still has any kind of activity against Omicron, is also something that's pretty widely available now because the amount of people with COVID-19 has really dropped. So it's available. You can take that up to 10 days. So I'm saying that because the title of my talk is How to Prevent and Treat COVID-19. And it would be a failure on my part if I didn't at least let you know that there are medications that are available in case you do get sick. All of these medicines, however, have side effects. Every medication that you ever take is going to leverage your body to treat its illness. Let me give you an example. If you have congestive heart failure and you're filling up with fluid, and someone puts you on a diuretic, we're leveraging your kidneys to treat your heart. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay? Medications don't solve the problem. They help you live longer by leveraging one part of your body against the other. What I'm about to tell you now has natural remedies which don't really have they have side effects, but they're good side effects. For instance, exercise is great for cardiovascular disease. Guess what a great side effect of exercise is? Less depression. Okay? So these are things that we use in an emergency, these medications up here. Okay? Because I'd rather you be leveraged and alive than dead. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, good. Let's start talking about some things now. We'll talk about vitamin D, sunlight, and sleep. So this is a study that was published that showed what we already know. This seems to be a recurring theme, is that low vitamin D levels are associated with severe COVID-19 illness. We have numerous studies going back for the last year and a half. People come into the hospital, people who end up on the ventilator, people who are dying have low vitamin D levels. This is another study that showed this. If we track people who have vitamin D levels of less than 12, as you can see there in red on the left, their survival probability is much lower than people who have vitamin D levels that are greater than 12. If we make the cutoff at 20, you can see there on the right that people with vitamin D levels of less than 20, again, have worse survival than those who have levels greater than 20. And we've actually talked about it. We did a MegCram video back in about a year ago. Very popular video. We got 12 million views. It was very popular, talking about vitamin D. Well, here's a study that was interesting. This was actually a study that was conducted by Dr. Martineau. Martineau is a very strong proponent of vitamin D. He loves vitamin D. And yet, in this study, when they gave them 3,200 international units of vitamin D when they had low levels, people still got sick with COVID-19. So we're seeing this paradox. This paradox is that low vitamin D levels seems to lead to a worse outcome, but when we give vitamin D prospectively, in a number of studies, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So we actually did a study on this. We did a light video. Here's what I am proposing and what I want to propose to you, and I want you to take very seriously. There's two groups of people in this world. There's people that tend to be outside people, and there's people that tend to be inside people, okay? Now, compared to the rest of the world, Americans, what are we? Typically outside people or inside people? What do you think? We are so inside people. And the reason why, this could be the reason why Americans, even though they're only 4% of the world population, at one point made up 25% of the worldwide cases of COVID-19. There is a problem with our health in the United States when that seems to be the issue. So the thing that I want you to understand is that when you are outside, you're exposed to obviously light that you can see, but also light that you can't see. Specifically, ultraviolet and infrared radiation. Are you familiar with those two things? Okay. So as you can see here, outside people have high ultraviolet radiation, and ultraviolet radiation is what is responsible for making vitamin D in your skin. Infrared radiation we'll talk about, but there is emerging evidence that near-infrared radiation from the sun is responsible for penetrating deep down into your skin, into your tissues, where it goes into the mitochondria, which are these powerhouses of the cell, and it increases melatonin. Are you thinking melatonin during sleep from your brain? It's the same substance, but it's made completely differently, and it's actually made not at night this way, but in the day. And there's some evidence, as we'll talk about, that intracellular melatonin is the key to having less severe COVID-19, among other things as we'll talk about. So look at the inside people. The inside people don't get ultraviolet radiation. They don't get near-infrared radiation. They have low vitamin D levels, and they have more severe COVID. And whenever we see this association. Low vitamin D levels equals worse COVID. Now, if this is true, what would happen if I gave extra vitamin D to those people? Would that change the amount of near-infrared radiation they're getting? Would we expect their COVID-19 severity to change in any way? No. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in other words, vitamin D may be a marker of inflammation. Take a look at this. Let's go through this methodically. This is influenza. Every single winter, we get a spike in influenza deaths. It's happened forever. Something is happening to the human body during winter that causes it to be susceptible to influenza, because exactly the same thing happens in Australia and South Africa, except it's shifted by 6 months. So what is it about this? Well, we could say that it could be, this is actually the distribution of irradiance from the sun. You can see there at 250 nanometers on the far left, that's the ultraviolet spectrum, and then there's the visible spectrum that it peaks at, and then everything from about right there over is near-infrared radiation. So is it possible, could it be that extra sunlight that we're getting in the summertime is giving us vitamin D, and the vitamin D is helping us with influenza? That's certainly a possibility. What happens about COVID-19? There's a study that looked at what happened during the winter of 2020 to COVID-19 peaks in Europe. So what they decided to do is say, okay, in Europe, in the winter of 2020, there was these peaks of COVID-19. And they said, I wonder if those peaks has anything to do with humidity or temperature or the latitude. And what they found is that there was no correlation whatsoever with temperature. There was no correlation at all with humidity. But what it was correlated with is that the very first countries to get their peak in COVID-19 were at the top of the map, and the last country was at the bottom of the map. So in other words, the first country was Finland, the last country was Greece. Imagine this, the sun is high up in the northern hemisphere in the summertime, right? Then it starts to drop in the summertime, and it reaches the equator in fall, right? September, and then it starts to drop down for the wintertime into the southern hemisphere. Which is the first country that's going to have the lack of sunlight that's going to it? The countries in the north, correct? And which was the one that got the first peak? It was Finland. In other words, they found there was a perfect correlation with the amount of sunlight that the country was getting. So there's something in the sunlight that's allowing people to get COVID. There's something in the sunlight that's preventing people from getting COVID-19. And when you remove the sunlight, i.e. wintertime, that's when they get the peak. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so what do you think it is? Well, they did another study. This was published in the British Journal of Dermatology by the University of Edinburgh. And they did a very interesting study. They studied you guys. When I say you guys, I'm from California. They didn't study us in California. They studied you guys in the northern part of the United States. Why did they study you guys in the northern part? They wanted to study a population of people that there was absolutely no way you could get enough vitamin D from the sun in the wintertime. So as you can see here on the map, they actually X'd out the entire lower portion of the United States, anywhere where they could get enough vitamin D during the wintertime. That should make you feel a little disconcerted, correct? Okay. Take your vitamin D. But what they found was for those people living in the northern part of the United States, they found a perfect correlation. You may not be able to see this here, but as you went up in latitude, as you went north in the United States, the mortality from COVID-19 went up. The more north you are, the more likely you were to die of COVID-19. They then checked this out in England. They found exactly the same relationship. Notice that they didn't have to block out southern England because nobody in England gets enough vitamin D in the wintertime, right? And actually, surprisingly, same thing in Italy. So what we're seeing here is that it's not temperature, it's not humidity, it's sunlight that seems to be providing the protection, at least for this epidemic of COVID-19. This is what the conclusion of the authors were. In conclusion, this study is observational, and therefore any causal interpretation needs to be taken with caution. However, if the relationship identified proves to be causal, it suggests that optimizing sun exposure may be a possible public health intervention. Given that the effect appears independent of a vitamin D pathway, it suggests possible new COVID-19 therapies. Guess what? There's more to the sun than just vitamin D. They just said that this worked even when people weren't getting enough vitamin D. So maybe it's something else in the sun that's occurring that's giving them this vitamin D. And as you'll note, yes, ultraviolet radiation does provide you with vitamin D, but the natural visible light also helps with circadian rhythm, which we'll talk about, and also mood. There's people that if they don't get enough sunlight, they will become depressed. Have you heard of seasonal affective disorder? It affects about 5% of the population, women more than men. It's a very simple solution. You get a light box, or you move south. All right? And then, as we're going to talk about now, there's also this whole spectrum of irradiation that comes from the sun that's in the near-infrared spectrum. And this is something that we believe can penetrate very deeply because this is a low-frequency light. It's a low frequency. High frequency is something that is very high in pitch. Low frequency is something that's very low. Low frequency can penetrate very well through walls. If there's a lightning storm very far away, you guys get more of this than we do in Southern California. If it's very far away, how does the thunder sound? Like a rumble, right? But if it's very close, you hear the crash and the bang. That's because when thunder is created, those low frequency waves can travel for miles and miles and miles. Let me put it this way. Let's say a bunch of teenagers pull up to you next to the stoplight, and they're playing really loud that thing they call music. What do you hear in the car? Boom, boom, boom. It's the low frequency sounds that you're hearing. That's because it's going through their car, your car, and it's shaking your steering wheel, right? That's low frequency. So that near infrared radiation from the sun penetrates very easily through our atmosphere. It even penetrates through your clothes, and then it keeps going right through your epidermis into your dermis, and then it reacts with your heat receptors that are deep in your skin. And that's the reason why, folks, when you go out on a day like today and you put your back to the sun, what do you feel? You feel warmth. That's near infrared radiation. You can only get that if you're outside. So what is that doing? Well, here's a paper that was published by the journal editor of melatonin, one of the top journals in the world on melatonin. He says, quote, "It has now been shown that the mitochondria produce melatonin in many cells in quantities which are orders of magnitude higher than that produced in the pineal gland in the brain. This subcellular melatonin does not necessarily fluctuate with our circadian clock or release into the circulating system, but instead has been proposed to be consumed locally in response to free radical density within each cell, in particular in response to near-infrared exposure. Based on an optical and biological review of the literature, it is proposed that near-infrared radiation portion of natural sunlight stimulates an excess of antioxidants in each of our healthy cells, and that the cumulative effect of this antioxidant reservoir is to enhance the body's ability to rapidly and locally deal with changing conditions throughout the day. In this approach, the role of the circulatory melatonin produced by the pineal gland is to provide an efficient method of delivering supplemental melatonin during periods of low cellular activity and solar stimulus to damaged or aging cells in both diurnal, that's daytime, and nocturnal, nighttime animals. While circulatory melatonin may be the hormone of darkness, subcellular melatonin may be the hormone of daylight. Melatonin is the most powerful antioxidant in the body that we know of. It's more powerful than glutathione. It itself upregulates glutathione. Why is that important? Let's talk about your mitochondria. This is really key for you to understand this. Why should you care about the mitochondria? You should care about the mitochondria because diseases of the mitochondria are linked to just about every chronic disease in the United States. Dementia, it's linked. Diabetes, it's linked. Even autism, it's linked. Okay? Mitochondria. Think of mitochondria as the engine in your internal combustion engine car. The mitochondria, the role of the mitochondria is to produce ATP, which is the energy of the cell. Just like your engine is designed to do locomotion with your wheels, the mitochondria is designed to produce power so your cells can operate. Now, an internal combustion engine is going to make locomotion, but as a byproduct of that, it makes heat in the engine. What happens if you don't take care of that heat? It's going to cause the engine to seize. You need a cooling system. You need oil. You need a radiator. And if you don't have those things, that engine is not going to continue to run. It's the same thing that happens in the mitochondria. If you don't have a cooling system in the mitochondria to make sure that the oxidative stress that is occurring in the mitochondria is dealt with, the mitochondria becomes damaged. Do you understand what I'm saying? And damaged mitochondria causes these long-term healthcare problems. So, oxidative stress is the heat in the engine. This is connected with less optimal health, inflammation, cancer, dementia, diabetes, learning disabilities, COVID-19. This is really important. So the body has two ways of getting rid of oxidative stress. There's a system that is put in place at night, and there's a system that is put in place during the day. At night, we already know about this. Those of you who are familiar with this will know that when you go to sleep at night and you close your eyes and your room is dark, the pineal gland secretes melatonin. Melatonin goes into the bloodstream, and then it goes into your cell, and then it goes into the mitochondria, and it cools down the engine. If you go to bed at night and your lights are still on, you're up watching television, you're on your iPhone, your computer, and light is hitting your eye, your pineal gland is not making melatonin. You're running your engine hot. Do you understand what I'm saying? We're starting to understand this now. This is really important. Guess which country on the planet does this more than any other country? We are running our engines hot at night. Okay? We're up at night. We're watching television. We're on our iPhones. We're looking at things. We're not turning off the lights and going to bed. This is a result of technology. This is because we have the freedom to do it. Our circadian rhythm was not built for this. Our circadian rhythm is telling us it's time to go to bed. There's things that have to happen at night. Okay, you guys are like a city. What happens if Detroit or Lansing decides to do road construction at rush hour? It's not going to be a fun experience, is it? That's why your body does repair at night, and it builds during the day. We'll talk about this when we get to fasting. We've got a lot to talk about here. But you'll see this over and over again, is your body has a certain rhythm to it. There's a circadian rhythm. When your body is resting, it's breaking down so that the next cycle it can build back better. Do you understand? And if you're not doing it at the right time, it's kind of like you can drive from here into downtown Lansing at rush hour, or you could do it when there's not rush hour. It's the same distance, but it's much easier to do it at one time than it is the other, correct? I will show you that you can have the same meal, same number of calories in a meal, and if you eat it at one time of the day, it's going to be much worse for you than you eat it at the right time of the day. It's because your circadian rhythm is built in for a certain timing. And with technology and all of the things that we have, you could go to Denny's, and I'll tell you, when you go to Denny's, it says breakfast, lunch, dinner, late night. Because you can. You can do whatever you want. Remember a time when you used to watch television and it actually would turn off at night? Like it would go static, remember that? Okay? That doesn't happen anymore. You can watch TV at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can. Does that mean you should? So what's the situation during the day? Well, scientists are saying that the sunshine makes melatonin during the day. But what happens? Do we get sunshine? No, we don't get sunshine. So let's move along here. So this portion of the solar spectrum, near infrared, 760 to 440, can penetrate deep into the epidermis, subcutaneous tissue, depending on wavelength. Guess what, folks? It also is predominantly reflected from the trees. So it hits the leaves and the grass, and we have evidence that goes back over 100 years that shows, here's the health benefits of the great outdoors, a systematic review and meta-analysis of green space exposure and health outcomes. People who live in green spaces get more near-infrared light than people who live in concrete jungles. We've known this for years. There are actually federal laws on the books that stipulate how much natural light has to come into a school window. Why? Because we have data that shows very clearly that students learn better when they are learning in natural light. We're now figuring out why that might be the case. We found spending time in or living close to natural green spaces is associated with diverse and significant health benefits. It reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, premature death, preterm birth, increases sleep duration. People living closer to nature also had reduced diastolic blood pressure, heart rate, and stress. In fact, the one really interesting thing that we found is that exposure to green space significantly reduces people's levels of salivary cortisol. You know what that is? That's stress. This is mind-blowing. So near-infrared radiation can actually penetrate your skull. It hits the cerebral spinal fluid around your brain, which then uses it as a lens to disperse the light. And then the sulci on the top of your brain where the gray matter is gets reflected down deep into the sulci and the gyri. And it interacts with the gray matter. This is mind-blowing. Like you're saying, really? Light penetrates the skull? Yeah. For those of you who are physicians, know that there's a technique that we use when we actually examine people's sinuses. It's called transillumination. We put a light on the maxillary sinus and we can look in the mouth and see if the bone is illuminated. That's light that's traveling through the bone. And that's visible light. We're talking about near infrared, which is like boom, boom. It can transfer even more. Don't believe me? Look, multiple sclerosis patients on the top, controls on the bottom. And they divided it into sun exposure. What do you see here? The people with most of the sun exposure had more gray matter and more whole brain volume in both multiple sclerosis patients and in controls. If you have a child that has a learning disability, let me recommend to you, get them out in the sun. Get out into the sunshine. This is a near-infrared photograph of Central Park. What do you notice? The trees are lit up. Why? Because the leaves are reflecting near-infrared radiation to you. What are the buildings? Very, very dark. You're not getting near-infrared radiation from the buildings. Why is this important in COVID-19? Well, in all of your cells, specifically your endovascular cells, your blood vessel cells, there's something called angiotensin II, which is a pro-oxidant. That's bad. But guess what? It gets converted into angiotensin 1,7, which is an antioxidant. That's good. What does it? ACE2. Does that sound familiar? ACE2 is the receptor for SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2, when it binds ACE2, shuts it down. So now the major balancing protein in your cell, which gets rid of pro-oxidants, is knocked out. What happens to the amount of oxidants in your cell? Goes up. So pro-oxidant angiotensin II leads to reactive oxygen species. That's not good. And angiotensin 1,7, which was an antioxidant, goes down because you don't have ACE2 and you get more reactive oxygen species. And of course, never mind the fact that the virus itself attracts white blood cells and that adds more reactive oxygen species. So what's happening here is when you get infected with coronavirus, the amount of oxidative stress on your body goes dramatically up. And if you're out of balance to begin with, that might be enough to knock you over. So the way to make sure that you're corona-proof is to improve the oxidative stress of your body. How do you do that? Because this reactive oxygen species are bad. It can lead to blood clots, which leads to hypoxemia. Well, let me recommend to you getting enough sleep at night, because melatonin is a very powerful antioxidant. And this is not supplementation. Don't go out and buy melatonin and take it. This is naturally produced melatonin from your own pineal gland. That's how you need to get it, okay? And how do you get it during the day? Get outside. Very simple. Do you know what percent of our days we spend outside as Americans? 7%. 7%. Let me tell you, it's actually even worse than that. Let me show you here. They actually measured oxidative stress in people without coronavirus and in people with coronavirus. So look at this. This is a measure of antioxidants. So this is actually good stuff that you want. Notice that as you get older, we're looking at blues, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 plus, the amount of antioxidants in your body goes way down. It's just natural. That's why, maybe that's the reason why older people are more susceptible to COVID-19, perhaps. Notice that people with COVID, statistically significantly less across the board. It's being sucked up, it's being used up, and all across the board. Okay, what about oxidative stress? Now higher is worse. In the control groups, notice what happens. As you get older, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 plus. It's not good. Another reason perhaps why older people are more susceptible to COVID-19, because their oxidative stress is horrible. And in COVID-19, it was even worse. What about plasma F2 isoprostane? This is a measure of oxidative damage. It's damage that's already happened. Again, across the board, as you get older, blue, control subjects, gets worse. And in COVID-19, it was worse across the board. So if you want to prevent this, you want to get melatonin in any way you possibly can. You want to get melatonin before sunset. And the way you do that is by getting out into the sun. Not directly necessarily. Remember, that'll go through clothes. Just get outside, and you will get enough near-infrared radiation. How do you get it after the sun goes down? Close your eyes and go to bed. That's how you get it. I'm telling you, I'm going to make the rubber hit the road here. You know, I find it really interesting that eventually everybody sees the light. Have you heard of that saying? Everybody sees the light? Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess. It's much better to see the light before it closes. Because if you see the light before it closes, it's to your body's benefit. If you see the light after it closes, it's to your body's detriment. Isn't that interesting? I think that's so this is not new. People used to do this all the time. Why? Because I believe physicians and healthcare professionals 100 years ago had better observational skills than we as physicians do today. Why? Because we can depend on all these sorts of fancy technology. They knew that people that were out in the sun did better. These are hospitals that were actually built with sunbeds basically built into the situation. And maybe it's not just vitamin D that we're getting from the sun, but we're getting benefit of vitamin D, circadian rhythm, mood, and melatonin. Folks, I would highly recommend to you that you get outside, because this is what's happened to us in society. The first bar is what we were like in 1800. This is the amount of visible light we were getting in blue, but I want you to pay attention to the amount of near-infrared we were getting in red in 1800. And then in 1950, we started going outside instead of 50% of the time. We only went outside 25% of the time back in 1950. Okay? And then in 1990, we started switching out our incandescent bulbs with fluorescent bulbs, and we only went outside maybe 15% of the time. And then now, in present time, we only have LED bulbs, which make no near-infrared radiation, and we've put all of these nice glasses in our house that prevent near-infrared radiation from coming in because we want to save on our energy bill. Right? So this is what it looks like. Here's the solar spectrum of the sun in yellow. Here is an incandescent light bulb in red. Notice all of these are nicely in the near-infrared spectrum. But here's our LED bulb, 0 in the near-infrared spectrum. And here's the glass that we're putting in. In this red envelope, we're looking at near-infrared radiation. Here's our clear glass here. Very nice. This is like back in the 1950s. This is like in the 1960s, 1970s. You go down, I went down to the village today, down in Lansing, Battle Creek, I should say, that little village down there, and I could notice when I'm looking through the windows, they kind of had that distortion. Yeah, those are the windows that we used to put in back in the 1950s and the 1940s, right? Here's the amount. Let's just go down to the bottom here. Here's low solar gain, low E glass. Almost no infrared radiation transmitted by that glass. So if you want to get near-infrared radiation, the only solution that you have is to go? All right, I think we've tackled that. Now, we're going to talk about exercise. So here's the solution that you can do. How many people have all the time in the world? Because if you have all the time in the world and you're not busy, this is what I highly recommend to you. I highly recommend to you, if you have all the time in the world, is to do your exercise by buying a membership to a gym and going inside and doing it underneath the fluorescent lights. So you take care of the exercise portion. And then, because you have all this time, now go outside and sit in the sun and get the near-infrared radiation. That's what I recommend to you who have all the time in the world. Now, to those who don't have all the time in the world, let me recommend to you that you cancel your gym membership and you do all of that work that you were doing in the gym outside. And if you're lucky and have a garden, maybe do some gardening and get some vegetables out of it. That's for another part of the talk. Does this make sense? All right, we're putting it, I'm sorry if I'm coming across sarcastic. But we seem to do this sort of stuff. So not only does light from the eye go to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is for our circadian rhythm, but it also goes to something called the perihibennular nucleus, which actually helps us with our mood. Okay? So going into the sun also is going to help for our depression and our seasonal affective disorder, which probably a lot of us are just coming out of right now, right? Because we just went through that. This slide is to remind me and you and everybody that it only takes a few photons of light into the eye to shut down melatonin production. So please stop looking at light after 9 o'clock, if you can, okay? This is so well known. I was really flabbergasted and surprised to see how well we kind of knew this 150 years ago, but we seem to have forgotten it. So this is a notable health reformer who wrote about the sunshine. She says here, the feeble one should press out into the sunshine as earnestly and naturally as do the shaded plants and vines. The pale and sickly grain blade that has struggled up out of the cold of early spring puts out the natural and healthy deep green after enjoying for a few days the health and life-giving rays of the sun. This might be appropriate here in Michigan. Go out into the light and the warmth of the glorious sun, you pale and sickly ones, and share with vegetation its life-giving, health-dealing power. And then she writes, make it a habit not to sit up after 9 o'clock. Every light should be extinguished. This turning night into day is a wretched, health-destroying habit. How did we know this at that time? Or maybe we didn't know this. I don't know. But that's sleep, vitamin D, and sunshine. Let's talk about exercise. So they've actually done an analysis of exercise. Exercise is a funny thing. I remember when I was a kid and they gave us a Snickers bar. Yeah, Snickers bar. Anyone have a Snickers bar before? Yeah, okay. If I gave you 5 Snickers bars, okay, and you had all 5 of them, okay, let's just say, all right, we would never do that now, but let's just say you had 5 Snickers bars. Which one would taste the best? The first Snickers bar or the 5th Snickers bar? Yes, so we all are aware of the idea of diminishing marginal utility, okay? That's a thing that we all know. And you know what? Exercise is the same thing. How many of you have heard about somebody in the last 2 years that died of COVID-19 and they were a marathon runner? I've heard it, right? And what do we say? We say, wow, and they were a marathon runner. Well, I have some education for you to do tonight. Because as it turns out, exercise is a J-curve. And this is well described in the literature. I have to be honest with you. I have a saying in my house. My wife loves to go out on trails and loves to jog on the treadmill. I have a saying. My saying is, no pain, no pain. I'll take that. No pain, no pain. Hey, why do we need to say anything more? In this J-curve, I am on the left side of that J-curve, okay? I'm the couch potato. Not really, but sort of, okay? Any exercise that I do above what I'm doing is going to go down on that J-curve. And that's a good thing because that's a reduction in stress, that's a reduction in cytokines, that's a reduction in infections. There comes a point, though, when you start to do too much exercise, and that actually causes stress on the body in a negative way that actually predisposes you to getting infections. Did you guys know that? You had never known that. This is so much the case, and I'm not joking with you, this is so much the case, that there are papers that are written by scientists for Olympic committees in each country to know what to do with their athletes so that they don't get infection. These people train for 4 years. Very elite athletes at the top of their game. The last thing they want to do is get sick a week before the Olympics. Do you understand what I'm saying? They have to treat them more carefully than you or I because they are more susceptible to getting illnesses than we are. So here's the thing I want to have absolutely dispelled in your mind. When I say you need to go exercise, all of you immediately, because of marketing, will think about the commercial on the television with the nice fit man and the nice fit woman doing the exercise, right? And you think, I've got to do that to get the benefit of exercise, right? Do we all hear that? That's not the case. In fact, doing too much exercise, I'm actually up here at the podium telling you that too much exercise can actually be bad for you. Let me show you a very interesting study. This is done not too far from here at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. It was done by Jennifer Heiss, who is the Fit Lab director there. She is at the campus at McMaster University where there are students, and she took these students in the last 6 weeks of their term and followed them. This is a very stressful time of their life. They're taking exams. They want to make sure that they pass. And she divided them randomly into 3 groups. The first group, no exercise. The second group, moderate exercise. And the third group, high-intensity exercise. Let me describe for you a little bit more what type of exercise they were doing. So both the moderate and high-intensity people were doing 3 times a week, 20 minutes a day, but the moderate intensity were only getting up to about 70% of their maximum target heart rate. And the high intensity were getting up to about 80 to 90% of their maximum target heart rate. What's your target heart rate? Take 220, subtract your age. So if someone's 50, 220 minus 50 is 170. That's your target heart rate. Okay? I remember when I was first learning this, I was 20 years old. It was so easy. I was just 200, 220 minus 200. Now I'm like almost 50. So yeah, 170 is my target heart rate. So you can kind of get a sense about what they were doing. So she measured their depression. She measured their blood tests. She measured their cytokines. This is what she found. Number 1, in gray were the people with no exercise. So in just 6 weeks of stress, there was a significant increase in depression in people that did no exercise. That's that gray bar that we're seeing here right at the far end. This is the Beck Depression Inventory 2. It's a validated scale looking at depression. Not only did those people that did moderate exercise not get increased in depression, they actually had less depression than those people than the same people did 6 weeks earlier, even though they were under stress. Okay, moderate exercise. Now, the people who did high-intensity exercise in red also developed a benefit, but notice that that benefit did not carry over for anxiety. That benefit did not carry over for perceived stress. What's the answer here? Moderate intensity exercise. Walking. Okay, you don't need to be running a marathon to get the benefits. In fact, if you are running a marathon, you're not getting the benefits. Okay, what about tumor necrosis factor alpha? That's a cytokine that's not really that great for you. IL-6 actually is the cytokine implicated in COVID-19 that causes the inflammation that gets people into the intensive care unit. What happened there? Notice that for IL-6, there was a reduction. The most reduction was in those that did moderate intensity exercise. And the people that actually had an increase were those that were doing the marathons. So the next time you see somebody, these elite athletes who are collapsing, these people are really running, these people are actually susceptible to inflammation and oxidative stress. Okay, so moderate intensity exercise. This is what Dr. Heiss, the director of the Fit Lab, says. A critical question we sought to address was whether different physical exercise programs that prevent the development of these depressive symptoms could also reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines. Indeed, we found support from this 6 weeks of moderate intensity continuous exercise, which resulted in less depression and lower levels of tumor necrosis factor alpha compared to the non-exercise control group. All right, let's talk about heat therapy. Hydrotherapy, cold contrast showers, baths, sauna, fomentations, all of these things. Generally speaking, in all forms, is a long amount of heat for about 20 minutes, followed by quick cold. Are you guys familiar with this? How many people like the heat? How many people like the cold? Oh, we got some people. Okay, we like some people who like the cold. That's the worst part, right? It's the cold. And I assure you guys here in Michigan, when you turn that thing cold, it's really cold. All right, you got to learn something a little bit about the immune system. So cells of the immune system, there are 2 aspects of your immune system. There is the adaptive immune system, and there is the innate immune system. The innate immune system is here on the left. This is the part that goes around your body eating up things that are foreign, but they also go around the body eating up things that are self but damaged. I want you to, again, think about the analysis of a city. A city that builds things. You guys have houses that are built, correct? When that house is built, is it good for life, or do you have problems with the house eventually? Do pipes leak? Do roofs leak? Imagine if you never fixed anything and all you did was build. What would be the quality of the type of structures in that city? Pretty bad, right? That's what happens when you eat all the time and you don't allow the body to fast. That's what happens when you're awake all the time and you don't allow the body to sleep. It has nothing to do with the weight, because junk weighs the same amount. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so this is really important. It's your innate immune system that is very important at making sure that the quality of your body is perfect. Hold on a second. All right. So, the adaptive immune system is for antibodies. We're going to talk about the innate immune system in this situation, because the innate immune system, the way it fights is through something called interferon. Interferon is a protein that the innate immune system secretes that helps fight against infections like COVID-19. It's very well named because it is interfering with viral infections. So here's a study that was published in Science. And what it shows clearly is that people who had mild COVID-19 infections secreted a lot of interferon, and people that had critical COVID-19 infections secreted less interferon. Here's interferon activity: mild, lots of interferon; people with severe, less interferon; people with critical, the least amount of interferon. So interferon is very important early on in the infection if you want to nip COVID-19 in the bud. Not just COVID-19, but other ones as well. Any kind of infection. Here's a study that looked at what happens to interferon secretion if you increase the body temperature of a patient. So what they did was they took cells, lymphocytes, out of the human body at different temperatures. Those of you who know Celsius can see it at the bottom, at 37 degrees Celsius, at 37.5, 38, 38.5, finally here at 39 degrees Celsius, which is about 103 degrees Fahrenheit, there was a 10-fold increase of interferon when the body temperature got up. How many people here treat fevers with Tylenol? We all do that. Should we be doing that? Unless the patient is very tachycardic, that means a very fast heart rate, or they're delirious, or that the fever itself is going to kill them. A fever is the body's way of dealing with infections. The body is increasing the body temperature so the lymphocytes can create the interferon, which is going to treat the infection. This is really important. So important. This is a physician, Dr. Wells Rubel, who was the medical director of the New England Sanitarium back in 1918 when they had the flu pandemic at that time. Now, he was the medical director of the sanitarium, which is one of 10 sanitariums in the northeast of the United States that were treating people with COVID-19. Well, sorry, with the flu. Did I say COVID-19? With the flu, okay? And he wanted to compare what was going on there and compare it to what the regular physicians were doing in the Army hospitals. Listen to what he wrote in Life and Health, May 1st, 1919. The present epidemic of influenza has furnished excellent opportunity to test out the efficacy of rational treatments in dealing with respiratory disorders, especially in conditions accompanying and following attacks of influenza. Let me tell you folks what rational treatment was in 1919 in the Adventist sanitariums in the northeast of the United States. It was hydrotherapy, it was proper diet, it was getting outside, getting into sunshine, and getting fresh air. That's, and trust in a heavenly Savior. That's what rational treatment was. So he wanted to compare it. On the left, we have what was going on in the Army hospitals. On the right, we have what was going on in the sanitariums. So he got these numbers, and I'm pulling them out of his publication, and I'm showing it to you in a more graphic way so you can understand what's going on. The innate immune system, folks, that uses interferon works early in the course. And so there's two components to the course of anybody who got influenza. Number one, there were those that came in, as you can see there, and 16% in the Army hospitals went on to develop pneumonia. Now, this is prior to antibiotics. So people who got pneumonia had a pretty high mortality, and in the very well-staffed Army hospitals that had spared no expense, they were able to only allow 40% of those people to die, which means that their overall infection fatality ratio was 6.4%. However, in the sanitariums, only 2% went on to develop pneumonia. Do you see how early intervention with hydrotherapy, sunlight, and these sorts of things can prevent the complications of influenza? Only 2% of those patients went on to develop pneumonia, and because perhaps they didn't have the best physicians or the most trendy techniques available to them, these were the sanitariums compared to the Army hospitals. Instead of 40%, it was 55%, but I don't know if that's statistically significant because so few people actually went on to develop pneumonia. Only 11 out of 446 patients went on to develop pneumonia. And so the number of people who died, 6, for an infection fatality ratio of 1/6 of that, of what was going on in the Army hospitals. You know what one of the major things that they used in the Army hospitals to treat patients? Aspirin. Invented by the German Bayer company. This is World War I. Do you know what they actually said after all of this? They looked at it. They said that the German Bayer aspirin killed more servicemen than the German bullets. Bayer aspirin, discovered in 1899, had just come off patent, and it was being used like candy. Why? They felt that the symptoms of influenza was what was killing patients. And what was one of the major symptoms? Fever. And what kills fever? Nothing like aspirin. That's why they were using it. This did not go unnoticed. Okay, there were very well-read physicians all around the world that knew what was going on here. One of them was a guy by the name of Julius Wagner-Jauregg. He noticed in his psychiatric suite in Austria that people with neurosyphilis, when they got a fever, actually started to do better. So he had an idea. He took malaria, he took blood out of people with malaria and injected it into his neurosyphilis patients. Guess what happened? They got malaria. What are one of the hallmarks of malaria? High fevers. The high fevers in the neurosyphilis patients killed the neurosyphilis. He cured his patients with neurosyphilis by giving them malaria. And then he cured them of malaria because they had the treatment at the time, just quinine. Notice what this article that was just published in 2013 says. In the following years of his discovery, artificial fever was induced by any one of the following methods: the introduction of the patient to a parasitic disease, the injection of a foreign protein, injections of chemical substances such as sulfur, electrical means such as administration of diathermy or radiotherapy or placing the patient in an electromagnetic field, and simple immersion of the individual in a hot bath or placing him in a heat cabinet. For this discovery, Dr. Julius Wagner-Jauregg won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927. The very next year, the world discovered penicillin. And so what happened was it was much cheaper to develop a pill to give a patient to cure an infection than it was for a nurse to give the intensive treatments that this patient needed to have. I was just down in Battle Creek, the sanitarium. Do you know they would treat thousands of patients a day in that facility? This was prior to penicillin. It worked. But we in this country, and look, I'm not afraid of giving medications when medication needs to happen, but maybe we have forgotten something that is very easily scalable in a situation where we don't have a supply chain and we might get another pandemic. Can you see that happening? Let me tell you folks, when I'm working in the intensive care unit, we had so many dialysis nurses that had to leave because they got Omicron that we had patients coming into the intensive care unit that had not had dialysis in days. And when we called the dialysis team to come in, we couldn't get them in until the next day. And these were patients with potassiums of 8.8. Now, for those of you in the medical field, when I say a potassium of 8.8, that's near death. So I've already seen a taste of what it's going to look like when we don't have a supply chain, and that's very easy to happen. So when we don't have a supply chain, look, it's great to have vaccines, it's great to have medications, but if you don't have a supply chain, you don't have any of that. You can always turn on the spigot and have water. You can always apply heat. These are things that are going to be very hard not to have. And we should all be educating ourselves on rational treatments, as Dr. Wells puts it. There's another country on this planet called Finland. Let me tell you, they use hot and cold therapy like you've never seen it. In fact, there are so many saunas in Finland that if everybody in Finland decided to go into their sauna, there would be enough room for the entire country to go into the saunas. When they do sauna treatment, when they do sauna studies in Finland, the control group are those that only do it once a week. That's how much they do. I mean, they build saunas into their apartments. There is not another country on the planet, do you understand what I'm saying here, that does sauning as much? And so what is a sauna? They go into these rooms, they heat it up to 174 degrees plus, they're in there for 20 minutes, they come out. It's really interesting to me because the way they were practicing hydrotherapy in the United States is after they would do it, they would do something with cold. Are you guys familiar with the term mitten friction? Okay, where you rub it up. You know what? It's very interesting. In Finland, they do the same thing, except they get tree branches and they hit themselves in the cold aspect of it. And then they go back into the sauna. It's interesting. Every culture on the planet has their own version of this, hot and then cold. I've talked to people in Iraq. They said their mothers would put them into the hot sand to heat them up. We've known this as a human species for years, but we've forgotten it. Amazing data. All-cause mortality reduction in people that do saunas, and it's a dose-response curve. The more you do saunas, the more the benefit of saunas. All-cause mortality. Do you know what I'm talking about? That means that they died of everything less often when they did saunas. Major cardiovascular disease benefit. I'll leave it at that, but if you want to look into this, look at the data on saunas in Finland. It's very interesting. Finally, let's wrap up here as the hour is getting late. Fasting, folks. Before we get to fasting, let's just finish this up. I'm not going to even talk about what you're eating or how much of it you're eating. Okay, you've heard probably enough of that. I'll just say this study, very clear study, COVID-19 study, people that had a plant-based diet were almost 4 times less likely to die of severe COVID-19 than the cohorts that had high protein, low carbohydrate diet, paleo diet. Published, peer-reviewed British Medical Journal. Okay? It was an association study, it wasn't a causation study, but I'm going to leave that at that. The rest of what I'm going to talk about in the last 3 minutes is the circadian rhythm idea. There is a plan on when you need to do things. There is a conductor that's conducting Beethoven's Fifth in your body. And if everyone's playing and the oboist decides to come in halfway through the concert and play the music perfectly, but just play it at the wrong time, it's going to sound like a cacophony of confusion. You have a conductor in your mind that is conducting your body, and it's tied to the circadian rhythm. There is a specific time that you should be eating. There's a specific time that you should be looking at light. There's a specific time that you should not be eating. There's a specific time that you should turn off the lights. And if we deviate from those things, you're not getting optimal health. Did you know, for instance, that in the morning, your insulin levels are the most sensitive? What does that mean? That a meal in the morning is going to cause less metabolic damage than a meal in the evening. Same calories, same meal. Again, I'm not talking about what you're eating. I'm not talking about how much you're eating. I'm just talking about when you're eating it. This is huge. It's like a city. There is a time when you build, and there's a time when you repair. And if you mix those things up, it's a problem. In Disneyland, I had a friend that used to work at Disneyland. They have all the rides going during the day. You know what they're doing at night? Do you think they just turn off the lights and leave? No. People are entering the cash register. The gardeners are coming out. They're inspecting the rides. What would happen if they did all that during the day? It wouldn't work, would it? You are a lot more complicated than Disneyland, let me assure you. Building, repair, these things have to happen at certain times of the day. This is a paper that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Fasting is not just about eating less calories or burning fat. Let me be very clear about this. When I talk about fasting, it's not a gimmick for you to eat less calories. Fasting actually signals your body that it's time to start to repair. They say when the body switches over to ketones, it signals to the body to completely metabolize in a different way. Ketone bodies are not just fuel used during periods of fasting. They are potent, signaling molecules with major effects on cell and organ functions. Very important. Ketogenesis activates activity in a variety of cellular groups. So this is really important for you to understand. It enhances the body's defense against oxidative and metabolic stress, and it initiates removal or repair of damaged molecules. This carries over to the non-fasting period and can improve glucose regulation, increase stress resistance, and suppress inflammation and improve mental and physical performance. This is going to get complicated. I'm not going to get into too much of the detail, but there's cell signaling that's going on here. When you have fasting, you get increase in something called sirtuins. Sirtuins are connected to longevity. There's something called AMPK, the ULK complex, something called autophagy or autophagy or self-eating. That sounds really bad, right? But it's actually good. Your body is going through and saying, that doesn't look good, tear it down, build it back better. If you don't get that opportunity for that to happen, you go through life with it not teared down and you keep using it damaged. You don't want to be using stuff damaged. You want to tell your body to tear it down and build it back better. And that's exactly what happens. This has to do with cancer, diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease. Here's a study from USC. What they found is that when their patients fasted for 3 days and they gave them chemotherapy, the white blood cells didn't drop. They said that the immune system came back so strong they had never seen anything like it. It was like it was completely reborn after 72 hours of fasting. It turns white fat into brown fat. Brown fat, if you don't understand, increases metabolic health. It increases your basal metabolic rate. How many people want a higher basic metabolic rate? I want a higher basal metabolic. This is the thing that keeps you thin, right? Remember when you were young? You could eat a piece of cake and eat another piece of cake and like you sit the same weight, right? That's how you do that, is by, well, not by eating a piece of cake, but by increasing your basal metabolic rate. This is an amazing study. Let me just show you this quickly and we'll wrap up. This was a Chinese study, 121 overweight type 2 diabetics in China. Okay? 1-to-1 randomization, and this is all they did. They didn't tell them what to eat. They didn't tell them how much to eat. All they said to them was this, and this only. You are only allowed to eat from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's it. You're not allowed to eat before 8 a.m. You're not allowed to eat anything after 6 p.m., period. Just by doing that, there was an 18% reduction in their hemoglobin A1C. That's huge. Okay, placebo dropped by 8%. The intervention group, 18% reduction. Fasting glucose dropped by 26 milligrams per deciliter, and they dropped 6.6 pounds versus the 1.8 pounds in the control group. All they said was, do intermittent, time-restricted eating. That's all they said. Other benefits, reduction in visceral fat, reduction in fat mass. Here's something for you. If a woman has had breast cancer and she fasts less than 13 hours per night, there's an increase of 36% of recurrence of breast cancer. Your body has to be able to have the chance to go through your system, find the stuff that's damaged, and get rid of it so you can build back better. The only way your body can do that is if you have a period of fasting that's long enough. The only way you can do that, since there's 24 hours in a day, is to limit the time that you're eating. Do you understand what I'm saying? So how do we do this? How do we get started? You need to figure out your 7 hours of sleep that you need to get. Add 1 hour after waking up. Don't eat until an hour after waking up. And then back calculate 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed and say you're not going to eat. It's really important not to have food in your stomach 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. When you go to bed and go to sleep, your circadian rhythm is kicking in. It's better to be in the fasted state than in the fed state. When you have your last morsel of food and it goes into your mouth, you're still in the fed state for up to 4 to 5 hours that your body is working. You do not switch into a fasted state for 4 to 5 hours. Here's another example, real quick. This person had breakfast at 8 o'clock, 2 o'clock lunch, and an 8 o'clock dinner. This person had exactly the same calories, ate exactly the same thing. Breakfast was at 8 o'clock, lunch was at 11 o'clock, dinner was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Time-restricted eating. What do they see? Amazing things happen. After just 4 days. After just 4 days, there was an increase in cortisol in the morning, which is good, and a decrease at night, which was better. There was this increase in something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a substance that nourishes the neurons in the brain and makes sure that they survive. and helps them. This is really important. Sirtuin-1 went up. This is something that goes against inflammation, oxidative stress, and DNA damage. And finally, something called LC3A. After just 4 days, went statistically significantly higher. It's implicated in cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, and recycling damage and used proteins and organelles. Folks, it's just a matter of restricting the amount of time we're eating. It's impressive. What breaks a fast? Anything that has calories in it. So you can drink water and lemon, no problem. So what do you do? Who is this not for? People who are pregnant, people who have a history of eating disorders, people who have problems with blood sugar because of type 1 diabetes. Talk with your physician first if you have an issue. So we've talked about medication, vaccines, vitamin D, sunlight, sleep, exercise, heat, cold therapy, and fasting. This is a nice little schedule that I put together for people. How many people here do 12-hour shifts? Okay, it's really hard to do this. I also work a 12-hour shift, so I've put together a schedule here for you, how you can get the benefits of this and not be, because look, I do the same thing. I get home at 7, and if there's dinner for me, it's at 8 o'clock. When am I supposed to go to bed? 12 o'clock? Right? I got to wait 3 to 4 hours. So this is what I recommend doing. Get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, look at a SAD light. This is one of those light boxes that you can get. It grounds your circadian rhythm and tells you that the light's coming up. It's about 10,000 lux for 20 minutes. 5 to 6 o'clock in the morning, you can do your devotional, you can do your workout, and then an hour later at 6 o'clock, you can eat breakfast. 6:30, leave for work, get to work at 7. If you get lunch, when you get lunch, make sure you go outside and get into the sunlight. Okay? Get some sunshine. It'll help you. And then when you leave work, you're going home. When you're eating, by the way, at lunchtime, that's your last meal of the day. So eat well. And then when you get home, you're not eating. You're going to bed at 8 o'clock, and when you go to bed at 9 o'clock, you still have another 8 hours to get your sleep. So what do? You get your sleep, you get your melatonin at night, you get your melatonin during the day, you're doing your time-restricted eating. Folks, if you follow this schedule, I guarantee you, you will feel better, your metabolic health will improve, and you will do a tremendous impact on the prevention and treatment of COVID-19.
Wow. People are still taking pictures of the screen. Make sure they can get it. Thank you very much. So much to learn there. I do have a quick question for you. Then I'm going to invite Dr. Kim up here, but if you don't mind just coming up for a quick question on the infrared rooms. If they had, or the saunas, if they have infrared saunas, do you get the same effect as a near-infrared light? Do you know?
Yeah, so you can get near-infrared from a lot of different ways. One is from the sun. You can also get it from devices that give off near-infrared radiation. But remember that near-infrared radiation is going to be in a more narrow spectrum, and we don't have the controlled trials in that. From the sun, it's a very broad spectrum of near-infrared. There is another source of broad-spectrum infrared, and that's a natural fire.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Dr. Kim, come up and join us. We're going to let you out here. I know we've run a little long. We've really tried to be prompt, but this has been exceptionally good, and we're so thankful you came here. Dr. Kim, he talked about hydrotherapy. What's happening Thursday night that no one wants to miss out on?
Well, you may have thought, what? How do I do that? I really am inspired. Next time you get sick, you want to figure out this whole heat and cold thing. Well, don't worry. Come Thursday night, Rich and Rhonda Smith, so she's a nurse. They've actually worked at, they were nursing director at 2 of the different sanitariums that are currently in existence right now, doing hydrotherapy, teaching people hydrotherapy. So they've actually gone all across the country practically showing people how do you do this thing called hydrotherapy. And it's actually not complicated. They're going to show multiple different ways of being able to do it. Something you can just do in your shower. Something that you can just do with a pot of water on your stove. Something called fomentations. And I think they're going to be able to get into some of the other treatments as well. So you will not want to miss it. No special equipment required. Invite your friends, family, enemies. So we want them all to be well.
We hope. Thursday evening, 6:30. Look forward to seeing you there. Let's stand for prayer as we dismiss. Father in heaven, truly we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you've put us in a world that when we are in nature is pristinely designed for our optimum health. I ask that you will help us to remember everything that we learned and go and apply it in our lives, in how we sleep, in how we spend time outside, in how we exercise, and when and what we eat, that we might have the optimum health that you desire for us. Bless each one of us as we go from this place and bring us back safely on Thursday evening. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Thanks for being here. Look forward soon.